Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking Episode 3 of The Sprint, titled What the Missing Rows Were Worth. We are taking a massive leap here. We're transitioning from someone who simply writes queries to someone who engineers their data science work like a seasoned software developer, all while maintaining a razor-sharp commercial awareness. We're going to explore exactly what happens when you stop just pulling data and start treating your analysis like a robust, deployed product. Because in the real world, finding a number is really only 10% of the job. Proving it and then monetizing it is the other 90%.
Here is how we're breaking things down today. First, foundations, the silence of missing data. Then, craft, reproducibility is your credibility. Third, career, profit centers versus cost centers. And finally, some real-world takeaways.
Kicking things off with Section 1, Foundations, the silence of missing data.
To really get SQL joins, you have to remember that databases are deliberately taken apart to avoid storing the exact same fact twice, which leads to all sorts of nasty, contradictory update anomalies. Designers split data into many small tables. Your job is to stitch it back together. And that brings us to our defining thesis. Bad data is loud. It throws an error in your face, right? But missing data? It is completely silent. When you use a default inner join, it silently deletes every single row that doesn't have a perfect match on the other side. There's no warning, no red flashing text, just a clean-looking table with the truth missing from it. In a recent analysis, this exact mechanic erased a league's top scorer. A player named Osai, who ranked first at 0.83 goals per 90 minutes, just vanished from the final report, simply because a completely different table happened to be missing his club's name.
And this brilliantly illustrates the mechanical difference between your choices. An inner join is silently destructive. It just discards unmatched rows. But a left join keeps every single row of your primary left table, whether it matched or not. If there is no match, the columns from the right table just come back as null. You have got to remember that inner is the default option in SQL, which means the default is the destructive one. As a professional, your baseline rule should be to assume absolutely nothing survived your join until you explicitly count the rows.
So you run that left join, and boom, you get a bunch of blank spaces. It makes you wonder, what does a null from a left join actually mean? We tend to panic a bit when we see them, but shifting your mindset here is absolutely critical. A null coming out of a left join is not some cosmic mystery, and it definitely isn't broken syntax. It is simply a failed lookup with an owner. It means the value exists on the left, but the right table has just never heard of it. It's a completely fixable problem. But watch out, there's a trap here. SQL uses three-valued logic. So if you try to filter with where league equals null, the database evaluates that as unknown, not true, meaning it's going to match exactly 0 rows. You have to always use isNull.
This brings us to the absolutely crucial concept of your grain. You should be able to point at literally any row in your output and finish the sentence, "This row is one player," or "This row is one league." Say the grain out loud before and after every single join. If your join causes a fan-out, meaning say 6 rows go in but 8 come out, your grain has silently broken. And the second your grain breaks, every sum or count you run downstream is double counting. It's lying to you.
Moving right along to Section 2, Craft. Reproducibility is your credibility.
Listen to this, because it's so important. If they can't run it, it could all be a lie. A hiring manager or a key stakeholder's first judgment isn't about how clever or elegant your code is. It's about whether they can trust what you claim. They are going to open your repository, read the story, and try to run it. If they can't reproduce your result, your analysis instantly stops being evidence and just becomes an opinion with a pretty chart attached. A beautiful README is simply not a project if the code underneath it doesn't execute.
So how do you actually build that credibility? With strict repository hygiene. First up, make it public from commit 1. Perfectionism eats private repos. We've all been there, so being public right from the start means your messy first commit is just part of the journey. Second, use a .gitignore file. Think of it as the giant bouncer at the door, preventing system junk, virtual environments, or sensitive API secrets from ever leaking into your history. Third, pin your exact dependencies so the environment can be faithfully rebuilt. And fourth, write a dual narrative README. The top half should be a jargon-free story for the recruiter or the executive, and the bottom half is your technical instruction manual for the engineer.
Let's look at how this builds a rock-solid workflow. Version control basically happens in 3 mechanical stages. Git add puts your changed files into a box. Git commit seals that box and slaps a descriptive label on it, right there on your local machine. Finally, Git push actually ships that box off to GitHub. Commit and push are deliberately separate actions. You could commit 10 different granular thoughts while sitting completely offline on an airplane, and then push them all at once when you finally land and grab a Wi-Fi signal.
This highly disciplined approach ties beautifully into a core software engineering philosophy known as Hiram's Law. It states that with enough users, every observable behavior of a system becomes something someone depends on, regardless of whether it was documented or not. This is exactly why, circling back to our SQL foundations, you must always write an order by clause. If you leave your output unsorted, someone downstream is going to quietly build their entire pipeline on the accidental sorting order the database just happened to return that day. When that order inevitably changes, their pipeline breaks, and suddenly, that becomes your problem.
All right, let's zoom out for Section 3, Career, Profit Centers versus Cost Centers.
Every single seat in every company sits somewhere on an axis between being a profit center and a cost center. A profit center is a team whose output has a short, easily traceable line to revenue. If you can confidently say, my analysis moved revenue by X, you're a profit center. And those teams, they get funded in a good quarter. A cost center, on the other hand, like internal reporting or basic IT, spends budget just to keep the lights on and the company running. The brutal reality is that cost centers get cut in a bad quarter. Compounded over a decade, this fundamental asymmetry is going to dictate your entire pay trajectory and your job security.
The other axis of your career is the tier of the company you work for. And there's a massive misconception here. People naturally think a huge company is automatically a top-tier payer, but 40,000 employees does not mean Tier 3. A 40,000-person traditional bank in Mexico City might be Tier 1, paying local market rates. Meanwhile, a tiny 60-person startup in San Francisco might actually be Tier 3, paying top-of-market global rates.
What's really fascinating here is how this redefines how you should view your own worth. Headcount is not tier. The auction is tier. Tier isn't some prestige ladder or a grade stamped on your forehead. It's just a cold, clear auction mechanism. It simply represents who else is bidding for your specific talent in that specific market today. It's just a fact about an employer's wallet, nothing more.
And that brings us to Section 4, In the Wild and Takeaways.
Let's permanently cement all this with a wild software engineering war story. Back in March 2016, a developer got into a naming dispute and unpublished his packages from NPM. One of those packages, called LeftPad, was literally just 11 lines of code. It just padded a string with spaces. 11 lines. Within hours, software builds were failing worldwide. Massive frameworks like React and Babel completely broke. Thousands of engineers at hundreds of companies could not ship their products, all because an 11-line function had quietly become load-bearing infrastructure. The registry ultimately had to step in and forcefully restore it. This is a visceral reminder that your project is only ever as reproducible as the weakest dependency you forgot to pin down.
Okay, let's rapid-fire the core takeaways you need to remember from this explainer. 1. Inner joins are destructive and they delete silently. Always check your row counts and say your grain out loud. 2. Reproducibility is your credibility. If they can't run it, it isn't science. Pin those dependencies and use your .gitignore. 3. Optimize your career trajectory for profit centers over cost centers, and understand that compensation tiers are just an auction, not a measure of your intrinsic human value.
I want to leave you with a profound thought from management legend Peter Drucker. He said, "Inside an organization, there are only cost centers. The only profit center is a customer whose check has not bounced." Think about that. Nothing inside the building actually makes money. Only the path to the customer does. So here's my challenge to you. Look at your daily work tomorrow and ask yourself, exactly how far from the path to the customer are you standing? Thanks for joining this explainer, and keep building that credibility.